World War Z is one of the most entertaining zombie movies ever made. It's also one of the most scientifically broken, from infection timelines that violate cellular biology to military tactics that would get entire battalions killed. Almost nothing in this film holds up under scrutiny. Today I'm breaking down everything World War Z gets wrong about survival, starting with the single mistake that ruins everything else. The Solanum virus speed, 10 seconds. That's how long it takes for a human being to get bitten, convulse, die, and reanimate as a sprinting zombie in this movie. 10 seconds. And that's not dramatic license. That's a complete abandonment of biology. Here's the thing. The source material, Max Brooks' own zombie survival guide, puts the Solanum virus incubation period at roughly 23 to 24 hours. That's not a rounding error. That's a fundamentally different threat model. One gives you time to quarantine, amputate, strategize. The other gives you less time than it takes to tie your shoes. But let's forget the books for a second. Let's talk real science. Rabies, the closest real-world analog to a neurological zombie virus, takes 1 to 3 months to produce symptoms. Months. And that's a virus that's had millions of years of evolutionary refinement to hijack the nervous system. So what exactly is the Solanum virus doing in 10 seconds that rabies can't do in 90 days? The answer is nothing, because it's impossible. No pathogen can commandeer human motor control and cognition in under 15 seconds. Neurotransmitters themselves don't propagate that fast. There's no fever stage, no immune response, no inflammation cascade. Your body doesn't just skip every biological defense system it has because a zombie bit your arm. Even in a worst-case septic scenario, you're looking at 6+ hours before systemic collapse. This is the original sin of the entire movie. Every tactical decision, every military failure, every survival strategy that follows is built on this broken foundation. And it only gets worse from here, because the film doesn't just break the timeline of infection, it breaks how infection actually works. Sound and vibration mechanics. Let's talk about the Israel Wall sequence, because this is where the movie completely abandons science and replaces it with a magic spell. Here's what happens. Thousands of refugees behind the wall start singing and clapping in unison. The zombies outside hear it, go into some kind of trance state, and begin piling on top of each other to climb over. The movie treats this like an established rule of zombie behavior. Rhythmic sound equals zombie frenzy. No explanation, no in-world science, just vibes. Literally. But here's the thing. There is zero biological mechanism for this. None. Not in living humans, not in dead ones, not in anything in between. The film implies these zombies are hypersensitive to low-frequency rhythmic vibrations below 20 Hz, which is already below the threshold of normal human hearing. Humans perceive sound between 20 and 20,000 Hz, so we're supposed to believe that death somehow upgraded their audio processing into the infrasound range, that decomposition unlocked a premium sound package, and the numbers don't help either. A crowd of 10,000 plus people singing and clapping generates roughly 90 to 110 decibels. That's enough to cause hearing damage in living humans, sure, but it's not enough to override behavioral drives in any documented organism on Earth. Soundwave hypnosis has zero peer-reviewed biological basis, even in living, fully functional human brains. The movie just skips past all of that. Most zombie fiction uses movement, heat signatures, or scent as triggers. Those at least have some grounding in how predators actually detect prey. But a sing-along? What exactly is happening neurologically when a dead brain processes a drum beat and decides to scale a 60-foot wall? Nobody knows, because the movie never bothers to ask. This isn't a survival insight. It's a plot convenience wearing a disguise. The script needed the wall to fall, so it invented a mechanism that made zombies do exactly what the scene required. On cue, no questions asked. But at least this scene only breaks the rules of biology. The wall collapse that follows? That breaks every rule of military defense doctrine simultaneously. The Israel Wall failure. This is the moment where World War Z looks the most impressive and makes the least sense. Israel builds a massive wall to keep the undead out. Smart, historically accurate in concept even. Concrete and steel barriers standing 8 to 12 meters high can withstand sustained RPG fire, small arms bombardment, and conventional explosives without catastrophic failure. The movie gives Israel credit for being the one nation that saw the threat coming and prepared accordingly. And then, a crowd starts singing. The zombies hear it, pile on top of each other like some nightmare cheerleading pyramid, and breach the wall. One structural event, one explosion, one gap, and the entire defensive strategy collapses like it was held together with duct tape and optimism. Here's where it gets dark. Real military defensive doctrine doesn't rely on a single wall, ever. You build secondary barriers behind the primary perimeter. You create kill zones, stage defensive positions, overlapping fields of fire. If the first line breaks, the second line is already waiting. If the second line breaks, you execute a fighting withdrawal to the third. This isn't advanced strategy. This is day one stuff. But in the movie, over 10,000 armed troops do absolutely nothing. Zero fighting withdrawal, zero counterattack, zero attempt to re-establish a perimeter. Every single trained soldier on screen simultaneously forgets their entire job description. The zombie horde moves at roughly 25 to 40 kilometers per hour. Coordinated suppressive fire from a prepared military force could reduce that horde by 60 to 75% before it ever reached a secondary defensive line. Instead, the most doctrine-heavy military on Earth just runs. The wall sequence is genuinely one of the most visually stunning moments in modern zombie cinema. The scale is incredible. The tension is real, but the threat only works because the script requires every defensive system, every trained response, and every contingency plan to vanish the second the plot needs them to. It's a masterclass in dramatic escalation built on a foundation of tactical nonsense. But at least the wall was a plan. Wait until we talk about how the world's combined militaries handle the outbreak in open combat. Military response and tactics. Here's what would actually happen if a mysterious pathogen started turning people into aggressive, biting maniacs. The military wouldn't roll tanks down Main Street. They'd lock everything down. Quarantine zones, isolation corridors, hazmat protocols. Nobody moves in, nobody moves out. And that boring, bureaucratic nightmare lasts a minimum of 14 to 28 days before a single offensive operation even gets discussed. That's not a guess. That's NATO doctrine. That's Department of Defense standard operating procedure developed after SARS, refined after Ebola, and drilled into every commanding officer on the planet. World War Z skips all of it. The film jumps straight to soldiers in urban combat, firing conventional small arms at an unknown biological threat in close quarters. No containment phase, no hazmat gear, no biological threat assessment, just boots on the ground shooting at things, which violates every infectious disease response protocol written in the last 2 decades. You don't send infantry into a hot zone the same way you'd send them into Fallujah. You send epidemiologists first, then you send more epidemiologists. Then, maybe after weeks of data collection, you send soldiers wearing equipment that actually protects them. But let's say the military did go full combat mode. Here's the part nobody thinks about. Real sustained operations require a 4-to-1 supply ratio. For every unit fighting, 4 units are moving fuel, food, ammunition, medical supplies, and maintaining communications infrastructure. The film shows unlimited ammo, functioning vehicles, and coordinated troop movements despite the fact that global supply chains have completely collapsed. In reality, that fantasy unravels within 72 hours. Guns without bullets are clubs. Vehicles without fuel are furniture. And the biggest issue? Zero command and control. Not a single sequence shows strategic resource allocation, operational planning, or the kind of coordinated decision-making that allows 100,000 troops to function as an actual fighting force instead of a heavily armed mob. Veterans and military analysts have a phrase for what the film depicts. They call it Call of Duty physics. Entertaining to watch. Completely disconnected from how militaries actually operate. But at least the military scenes pretend to follow some kind of logic. The film's approach to how zombies physically function throws logic out entirely. The camouflage theory. This is the moment the movie completely falls apart. And I don't mean, oh, that's a little unrealistic. I mean the entire climax of a $200 million film rests on a survival mechanism that has zero scientific explanation. None. Not even a bad one. Here's what happens. Brad Pitt's character figures out that zombies ignore sick people, so he deliberately injects himself with a deadly pathogen, walks right past a hallway full of zombies, and they treat him like he doesn't exist. The movie frames this as a brilliant survival breakthrough, a game-changing revelation, the key to saving humanity. But here's the thing. The film never once explains how this works. Not even a throwaway line. Not a single sentence of pseudoscience. Nothing. Let me explain why that matters. An infected human still generates a core body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, still exhales warm breath, still has billions of detectable skin bacteria, still moves, blinks, and makes noise. Infection doesn't change any of that. Real predators in nature use heat detection at 0.003 degrees Celsius resolution, scent tracking at 1 part per trillion sensitivity, movement recognition that triggers on the smallest shift. A virus in your bloodstream doesn't suppress your thermal signature. It doesn't eliminate your scent. It doesn't make you visually invisible. You would need 3 completely separate camouflage mechanisms operating simultaneously, and the movie gives you exactly 0. Viral particles do not rewire human biochemistry comprehensively enough to mask you from anything. This isn't a survival strategy. This is magic. Pure magic masquerading as survival logic. And what makes it worse? The book contains absolutely no version of this mechanic. It's entirely a film invention, created to give the movie a clean Hollywood ending. The moment this theory becomes the solution, the movie stops being a survival film. It stops engaging with its own rules. It just decides that infection equals invisibility because the script needed a third act. But if the movie's big survival answer is fantasy, wait until you see how it handles the actual tools of survival, because the weapon logic is somehow even worse. Airplane safety. Protocols. The airplane sequence in World War Z is genuinely impressive filmmaking. It's also the most physically impossible scene in the entire movie, and that's saying something for a film about sprinting corpses. Here's the thing. The movie doesn't just bend physics for this sequence. It shatters physics, ignores the debris, and keeps filming. Let's start with the basics. A commercial airliner at 35,000 feet maintains a cabin pressure differential of about 8 pounds per square inch against the near vacuum outside. That number sounds technical until you realize what it means in practice. A structural breach of just 0.25 square meters causes explosive decompression in under 2 seconds. Not slow decompression, not a gentle whistle of escaping air. Explosive. Every single occupant is incapacitated. The aircraft becomes uncontrollable. Zombies, humans, Brad Pitt, everyone. Done. But the movie needs zombies loose on a plane, so let's pretend the breach doesn't happen. Fine. How do the zombies even get started? Airplane doors require the equivalent of over 200 kilograms of force to open during flight because of the pressure differential pushing them into the frame. A zombie cannot generate this force. A strongman competition winner cannot generate this force. The door is physically locked by the atmosphere itself, and it gets better. Post-2001, every commercial aircraft cockpit has a reinforced bulkhead door certified against forced entry and pressurized impact. These doors were specifically designed so that no human, no matter how determined, could breach them during flight. The film shows none of these systems working. Zero. Now here's where it gets truly absurd. The noise alone from a cabin breach at altitude would trigger immediate emergency protocols from the crew. We're talking about 0 to 2 air marshals and 8 to 12 crew members trained for exactly this kind of scenario. The movie depicts zombies overwhelming this security layer silently on a pressurized metal tube flying at 500 miles per hour. Aviation professionals consistently identify this sequence as the single most impossible thing in the film. And the beautiful irony is that the movie accidentally wrote a perfect survival solution and then completely ignored it. The breach that unleashes the zombie threat would simultaneously end it. Explosive decompression kills everything at 35,000 feet. The plane solves itself. But that doesn't look as cool as a grenade going off in the cabin, so here we are. Speaking of things that should work but don't in this movie, the zombies themselves have a physical capabilities problem that goes way beyond airplanes. Zombie physical capabilities. Let's talk about what dead muscle tissue can actually do. And the answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing that the movie shows. World War Z depicts zombies scaling 15 to 20 meter walls, launching themselves 8 to 10 meters horizontally through the air, and sustaining sprint speeds of 35 to 45 kilometers per hour. These are elite athlete numbers, Olympic-level feats, and the movie hands them to corpses. Here's the thing. Every single one of those movements requires eccentric and concentric muscle contractions. That's the stretch and fire mechanism your muscles use to generate explosive force. Dead tissue can't do this. Rigor mortis eliminates the elastic recoil that makes any of it possible. The muscle fibers calcify, stiffen, and lose 40 to 60% of their tensile strength compared to living tissue. You're asking a steak to do a backflip. Biomechanically, a sprinting zombie is equivalent to sprinting furniture. It's a marionette designed by a sadist. But let's be generous. Let's say the virus somehow preserves muscle function. Even then, the speed doesn't hold up. Chimpanzees are the closest real-world locomotion analog for raw primate power, and they top out at about 40 kilometers per hour in short bursts. Short bursts. They can't sustain anything above 20 kilometers per hour for longer than 60 seconds before fatigue shuts them down. The movie's zombies maintain top speed indefinitely. No lactic acid buildup, no oxygen debt, no fatigue whatsoever. And that acceleration, going from stationary to full sprint in under 2 seconds, requires central nervous system coordination that ceases entirely at brain death. The signal chain needed to fire fast-twitch muscle fibers in the correct sequence simply doesn't exist post-mortem. Your brain is the conductor. Without it, the orchestra doesn't play. Max Brooks understood this. The book's zombies are slow, shambling, and relentless. And they're scarier for it, because they're plausible. A threat you can outrun but never outlast is genuinely terrifying. A threat that moves like a caffeinated cheetah with no biological explanation is just a cartoon. Now let's talk about the wall sequence, because the math here is brutal. A 100-kilogram human skeleton fractures under repeated impact forces above 4,000 to 5,000 newtons. That's roughly the force generated from a 10-meter fall. The Jerusalem pileup shows thousands of zombies stacking vertically against a concrete wall, climbing over each other to reach the top. The bottom layers are absorbing the cumulative weight of every body above them, plus the impact force of bodies falling and scrambling. Catastrophic skeletal failure would hit those bottom layers within seconds. You wouldn't get a zombie ladder. You'd get a bone-paste avalanche. But if you think the physics of zombie bodies are bad, wait until you see what the movie does with actual weapons. Bite, mechanics, and infection. We talked about the speed of zombification earlier, but now let's get into the actual mechanics of what a bite does to your body. Because the film treats a single bite like a death sentence with a 7-second fuse. And that's not how bites work at all. Here's the thing. A real bite wound, even from an animal carrying a dangerous pathogen, takes 6 to 48 hours just to show local infection markers. We're talking redness, swelling, heat around the wound site. That's not the full infection. That's your body noticing something is wrong. The film skips this entirely. You get bitten, you turn, no swelling, no fever, no immune response, nothing. But let's go deeper than just the timeline. Let's talk about saliva itself. Your mouth is actually a hostile environment for pathogens. Human saliva contains lysozyme, which is an antibacterial enzyme that actively breaks down foreign organisms. It contains immunoglobulin A, which neutralizes pathogens on contact. And it contains lactoferrin, which sequesters iron that bacteria and viruses need to replicate. Your own spit is fighting infection before your immune system even gets the memo. So the idea that saliva from a bite is a guaranteed instant kill vector? It contradicts how saliva fundamentally works. Now let's talk transmission rates. Viral transmission through saliva, without blood present, achieves success rates of 0.1 to 5% depending on viral load and wound depth. You need either mucosal membrane contact or deep tissue exposure for saliva-borne pathogens to reliably take hold. The film treats every single bite as 100% fatal, 100% of the time, with zero exceptions. That's not biology. That's a plot device. And even if we grant the virus a 100% transmission rate, there's still the immune response cascade. In every documented septic scenario, the body goes through fever, hypotension, disorientation, and altered consciousness before a pathogen achieves systemic takeover. That process takes 4 to 8 hours minimum. The film shows victims going from a bite on the forearm to sprinting, snarling aggressors in seconds. No transition state, no collapse, no biological middle ground. Here's why this matters beyond nitpicking. A realistic infection window of 12 to 48 hours would completely change the film's threat model. You'd have time to amputate a bitten limb. You'd have time to quarantine exposed individuals. You'd have time to administer antivirals or attempt treatment. The film knew this, and it made the trade anyway, compressing pathology into seconds because a 12-hour infection window kills the pacing of every action sequence. It's an honest sacrifice of biology for narrative urgency, but it means the film's central survival threat is built on a foundation that real medicine would demolish. But if the infection mechanics are fantasy, wait until you see what the film does with actual weapons. Weapon effectiveness. Here's where the film doesn't just bend the truth, it breaks it in half and throws it away. World War Z shows conventional firearms as borderline useless against the zombie threat. Soldiers fire carefully aimed shots, struggle to bring down individual targets, and the overall message is clear. Bullets don't really work, but that's not just wrong. It's provably, measurably, documentably wrong. A standard 5.56 NATO round travels at 940 meters per second and generates roughly 1,767 joules of kinetic energy at the muzzle. At ranges under 300 meters, that round fragments the human skull. Not cracks it, not dents it, fragments it. That's not speculation, that's terminal ballistics data established through decades of testing. The idea that a soldier with a rifle can't effectively neutralize a human-shaped target walking directly toward them in a straight line is absurd, but the film doubles down on this by insisting headshots are the only viable solution. Here's the thing. Realistic terminal ballistics, the kind validated through FBI gel testing protocols, show that center mass shots to the thoracic cavity are equally or more reliable for incapacitation. Why? Because the thoracic cavity is a massive target compared to the head. It's packed with with vital organs, and it doesn't require surgical precision under combat stress. The film forces a difficulty curve onto its soldiers that real ballistics doesn't support, and this is where it gets genuinely frustrating. The movie shows trained military personnel using precision fire against zombies. Precision fire against targets that don't take cover, don't return fire, don't flank, don't suppress, don't do anything tactical whatsoever. These are the single worst adversary you could possibly design for a precision fire doctrine, and the single best target set imaginable for suppressive fire. You lay down volume, you control the space, you attrit them as they walk into the kill zone. A standard infantry load is 7 magazines, 30 rounds each, 210 rounds total. At just 3 rounds per target using suppressive doctrine, one soldier neutralizes 70 threats before needing a resupply. The film's soldiers behave as though ammunition is precious, while simultaneously wasting every round on individual engagements that don't require individual attention. But here's the kicker. The source novel, the actual book this movie is supposedly based on, treats conventional weapons as entirely effective. Max Brooks wrote a world where bullets work, where military logistics matter, where organized defense wins. The immune to bullets nonsense the film leans on isn't from the source material. It's borrowed from decades of fictional zombie lore, a genre cliché layered on top of a story that explicitly rejected that cliché. It's not just bad physics, it's bad adaptation. But weapons are only part of the equation. The film's biggest logical failure might be how it handles thousands of zombies moving as one, because the herd mechanics don't just defy tactics, they defy physics entirely. Herd mentality, logistics. The Jerusalem wall sequence is the most visually impressive scene in the entire film. It's also the most physically impossible, and that's saying something after everything we've covered. Let's talk about what the movie actually shows you. Over 10,000 zombies converging on a 50-meter radius, stacking on top of each other like a living siege ramp until they crest a wall that was specifically engineered to be unbreachable. It looks incredible. It also breaks every known law of herd dynamics, biology, and basic spatial geometry. Here's the math. At 0.2 square meters per body, you cannot fit 10,000 organisms into that space without going cubic. That means bodies stacked 3 high across the entire surface area. The film presents this as some kind of emergent swarm intelligence, where thousands of uncoordinated dead organisms spontaneously self-organize into a functional ramp. No explanation, no mechanism. It just happens because the scene needed it to happen. But real herd dynamics don't work like that. Wildebeest migrations and locust swarms, the closest natural analogs to what the film depicts, show collision rates of 15 to 30% in high-density conditions. Those collisions cause cascade pileups that fragment the group. The horde should be tripping over itself, creating bottlenecks, collapsing under its own density. Instead, the film treats it as a frictionless fluid with zero internal friction and perfect directional unity. And here's what nobody talks about. Prey animals in documented panic states scatter once 30 to 40% of group members are removed. The horde in this film sustains continuous casualties from gunfire, explosions, and falls. It never thins, never fragments, never disperses. That doesn't happen in nature, ever. Then there's the coordination problem. Insects achieve swarm intelligence through pheromone signaling. Humans have non-functional vomeronasal organs. That mechanism is biologically unavailable to human-derived zombies. The film offers zero alternative explanation for how 10,000 independently acting organisms synchronize movement, direction, and target acquisition simultaneously. But the real sleeper hit is energy. 10,000 organisms sustaining continuous locomotion require approximately 12,000 calories per body per day. That's 120 million calories daily for a single horde. These zombies have no foraging strategy, no food intake, no metabolic replenishment. A horde this size becomes immobilized by caloric depletion within days. The global catastrophe the film depicts couldn't sustain itself biologically. The threat eats itself from within, and that's the thesis of this entire video. World War Z is a film about survival that systematically eliminated every real survival constraint for dramatic effect. The infection speed, the military response, the weapon physics, the camouflage logic. Every single system was bent or broken to serve spectacle. The horde is just where that trade-off becomes impossible to ignore. It's not a survival film. It's an action film wearing a survival film skin, and the zombie wall is the moment the mask comes off completely. If you enjoyed this video and want to see everything Resident Evil gets wrong about survival, click the video on the screen now.